Welcome to the Cafe Culture podcast, a season of discussions on culture, politics, philosophy and science.
At a talk recorded on the 7th of March, 2016, Timothy Ingold discussed What is the Sky?
Thank you very much. We all know, at least I imagine everybody here would agree that the Earth is round, like a ball. We also know that when we go around our daily business, walking from here to there, the Earth that we seem to inhabit seems to be more or less flat. And maybe for small children, the idea that the Earth is a ball might seem a bit strange. Intuitively, if you come into the world, you're playing around, it seems like you're living in a sort of a flat-ish kind of country in which you stand upright. And the idea that the Earth might be a ball seems a bit strange because you think, well, why don't people fall off on the other side? So some years ago, a group of developmental psychologists tried to do some experiments with small children aged between about 5 and 10 to find out how it is that despite their naive intuitions that the Earth seems in their experience to be flat, they nevertheless develop an understanding that the Earth is actually round. And they asked the children in their study to draw the Earth. So first of all, they said, draw the Earth. And most children then drew a kind of a circle. And maybe they put a few continents and things on it and said, okay, that's the Earth. And then the experiment said, now show us, where do the people live? Children scratched their heads a bit and said, well, some of them put a few figures around the outside of their circle and say, well, they kind of live there. But some of them said, well, that doesn't look right because some of them are upside down. So then some of them drew some little houses at the bottom of the piece of paper along the horizontal base and said, no, they live there. Then the experimenters said, now draw the sky. And the children were completely perplexed, as indeed I would have been if I had been one of those experimental subjects. In fact, I got to know about this because sometimes later I met the person who conducted this study in a conference and asked him, well, how would you draw the sky? And he said, well, I haven't a clue, but it's not my problem. I was the experimenter. It was the children who had to draw the sky. They didn't know how you were supposed to draw it. But the thing was that some of the children drew the Earth, when asked where people lived, they drew the Earth as a ball and put people around the outside. And they, according to the experimenters, had got it scientifically correct. They had the correct understanding of the Earth as this big ball and people living all around on the outside. But when those children were asked to draw the sky, well, one of them, who was particularly bright, said witheringly to the experimenter, you don't mean the sky, you mean space. And he proceeded to draw another circle around his original circle, a sort of gesture, saying, well, the space, your sky, is all around. But if you're going to think of the Earth as a great big ball in the solar system, you can't include the sky in that picture. Whereas the ones who'd drawn people actually living along the bottom edge of the paper, they had their picture of the round Earth there, they had their houses at the bottom with some people, and they drew some kind of clouds around the top edge of the paper. So they ended up with what looked like two pictures. They had a picture of the Earth as a ball, and then on the bottom of the paper they had some houses and some people, and at the top of the paper they had some clouds. Now the experimenters thought that these children were highly confused and that they were somewhere in a halfway stage between understanding an intuitive, naive understanding that the Earth is flat and a scientific understanding that the Earth is round. And being halfway in this transition, they had become what the experimenters called dual earthers. They thought there were actually two Earths. There's the one that we live on, and then there's another one that's up in the sky. But actually the children were being thoroughly consistent where the experimenters were not being, and recognizing that actually there are two different meanings of the Earth. And one is the meaning of Earth, the planet, which you can only see from a vantage point in outer space, and where it makes no sense to talk about the sky. And another sense in which we talk about Earth, the ground on which we dwell, and it's as ground dwellers living on the Earth that we actually experience what we say all the time up there is the sky. So it turned out that actually it wasn't the children who were confused at all, but the experimenters who were mixing up two completely different perspectives on what the Earth could be. A sort of astronaut's perspective, a view from way out up in a spaceship, or from Tim Peake's sort of view of the Earth, and an inhabitant's view of the Earth as actually dwelling in this land that we see around us and engaging with our immediate surroundings. So it wasn't the children that were confused, but the experimenters, and then more than that, that particular difference of perspective, let us say, between being on the Earth or in the Earth and dwelling in it, and then looking at it from the outside as though you were looking from on high, that duality of perspective is fundamental to the practice of science itself. Because here, as scientists, we say we are beings that inhabit this world, and yet it is the idea that we can look at the world from afar, from on high, that gives us the idea that we can make objective statements about it. So actually, the contradiction that was apparent in the children's responses to the experiment is a contradiction that lies at the heart of modern science. And it goes back a long way. I imagined, as a sort of thought experiment, I imagined that our experimenters in developmental psychology who've been testing these children could get into a TARDIS and go and visit a few dead philosophers, and the first philosopher, and see how they would respond to this particular task. And the first philosopher I thought about was St. Augustine, who has some very interesting things to say about the earth and the heaven, as he called it, in his Confessions, because he recognized that there are actually two ways in which you can talk about heaven. First of all, God, according to St. Augustine, created heaven and earth. That is, the cosmos in which we dwell. It has the sky up there, the heavens where the birds fly, and it has the earth where the crops grow, and the oceans in which the fish swim, and so on. And St. Augustine says, that's the earth, that's the heaven. It's the world in which we live. But then he said, but also there's something he called the heaven of heavens. And that heaven of heavens is only accessible to God, who made the whole thing. And that's a kind of transcendent view from out there. And from that point of view, what in the first perspective is called heaven can be regarded as part of the earth. So St. Augustine said it's not at all contradictory for me to say on the one hand that the sky is heaven, and on the other hand to say that actually the sky is part of the earth. Because if you take a mortal view, why heaven is just that realm in which the birds fly and so on. But if you take a God's eye view, then this whole cosmos, this heaven-earth, is all earth in relation to that other kind of heaven. Again, this would have been far too complicated for our experimenters to understand, but it's very clear in Augustine. So then imagine that they went to talk to Immanuel Kant. And Kant would have said, look, in my experience, the earth is indeed flat. But if the earth really was flat, then I would never know the full extent of what knowledge of the earth would be possible. I could know what is within reach of my horizon, and so if I'm standing here, I can see this far, and I can gain all the information about what is within reach of my horizon. I could maybe travel somewhere else and gain all the information I could get from there. But if the earth was flat, I would never, ever know. There would never be any point in which I could say, I know what the total sum of all geographical knowledge could be, because it could go on forever. But, said Kant, our reason is not arrayed on a flat plane, it is arrayed on the surface of a sphere. And the thing about a sphere is that it is continuous, but finite in space. So if I know how much I know at the moment, I can also calculate how much I know of what is knowable. So Kant reckoned that actually we do live on a spherical Earth. It's something that our minds bring to the evidence of our senses, this idea of the sphere. So not only is the Earth spherical, said Kant, but our reason is spherical as well. And reason maps on to the facts of the Earth. So it's actually from Kant that we get this idea, which our experimenters said was the scientifically correct one, that people live all around on the outside of a spherical Earth. So you have to think of the Earth as this big, solid sphere, and everybody living on the edge of it, on the outer surface. So the inside of the Earth, that's a kind of Jules Vernean nightmare. It's a solid, God knows what's going on in there, but we live all around on the outside. Now, one more character I want to bring in is the psychologist James Gibson. Imagine that our experimenters went to visit Gibson and what Gibson would say. Gibson was the founder of what is called ecological psychology. And he thought, no, we're not living all around on the outside of the Earth. We do live on the ground. But then he thought of the world in which we live, or which is apparent to our perception, as made up of two hemispheres. There's the hemisphere of the sky and the hemisphere of the Earth. And they meet around the line of the horizon, and the perceiver is there in the middle. So you have to imagine ourselves in the middle of a big ball with the Earth as the higher hemisphere, the sky as the higher hemisphere, and the Earth as the lower one. But then Gibson hit on a problem. He said that he wanted to think of the environment as a space that is cluttered with all the things that we perceive. So he said that, of course, the environment we inhabit and that we perceive around ourselves consists of the Earth, that lower hemisphere, and the sky, that upper hemisphere, but also objects on the Earth and objects in the sky. So the Earth is cluttered with lots of objects, rather like the bare floor of a house is cluttered with furniture, and the sky, where there are all sorts of objects in the sky, the sun and the moon and the stars, sunsets, and so on. And clouds. Now here's a problem. If we think of the sky like that, as this great hemisphere, do clouds hang in the sky? If you went up into the sky, would you find a cloud as an object floating around there? An object with surfaces that we're perceiving because of the light reflected off them. If it was like that, I suppose that air travel could be a rather risky business. But anyway, Gibson thought of the sky in that kind of way. It's this great hemispherical void with objects in it. Clouds, birds, the sun, the moon, the stars, and so on. Now, back in the 19th century, the Victorian connoisseur and art critic John Ruskin, in his first volume on painting, had a great diatribe against what he called the old masters, and he was referring to mostly to the great Dutch landscape painters of the 17th and early 18th centuries, who, as you know, when they painted their landscapes, at least 2/3 of the painting was usually sky. And there'd be some ground, some countryside, maybe a village and a town, and things going on, and then lots of sky and lots of clouds. And Ruskin said, yeah, but when you look at these paintings by the old masters, it looks as though the clouds are sort of hanging as objects in this big blue void, which is sort of looks solid. He said that it's as though the sky itself had retreated into this homogeneous blueness. And although you could imagine yourself in the picture going further and further and further and further, eventually you would strike hard up against it. You would hit this blue surface in which all the the clouds are hanging. But then we know the sky doesn't have any surface. It seems to be, you could go as far as you like and you'd never come to the edge, to this blue dome. So Ruskin said that the sky has no surface, that it's a domain of infinite variation. I want to quote his words. He said, "The sky is a deep, quivering, transparent body of penetrable air in which you trace or imagine short falling spots of deceiving light and dim shades, faint veiled images of dark vapour." That was Ruskin's description of the sky. Well, I've been still puzzling about how do we think of the relationship between clouds and the sky? We can't think of the cloud, it's no good thinking of the cloud as this object that's hanging in this void, so how do we think about it? And I started thinking about a sheet. Imagine a bed sheet, and it's a bit crumpled up, so it's full of creases. And you could ask yourself, well, what is the relationship between the crease and the sheet? It's not as though you can see that there's a line of the crease. Say it's a place where the sheet's been folded, perhaps. So you can see, yes, there's a crease line there. But it's not as though the crease line is hanging high and dry, whilst the rest of the sheet has kind of sunk back into a flat homogeneity. No, because the crease line is actually part of the sheet. So the line is distinguishing itself from the sheet, even though the sheet is not distinguishing itself from the line. That's, in a way, is a way of defining that line as a fold. So we say, yes, the sheet is actually, because it's crumpled, it's actually folded there, and that what we recognize as the line, that is a fold line. Now, imagine that you were to turn that, a sheet is a kind of two-dimensional thing. Imagine you turned it into 3 dimensions. Then you could say that the sky is actually highly crumpled. It's a crumpled mass of air. And we don't see all those crumples. Mostly they're invisible to us. But they do become visible in the formation of clouds, or partly anyway. So that clouds perhaps could be regarded as moisture-laden folds of the crumpled sky. They're crumples in the sky, they're not objects in it. And not long ago, I happened to visit the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, and they had an exhibition of paintings by a painter who was active in the post-war, from in the late 1940s, 1950s, early 1960s, Peter Lanyon. He was based in St Ives, and Lanyon was originally a landscape painter. He did rather abstract landscapes. That's what he specialised in. And then he felt, well, he's experiencing these limitations in what he could do. So he took up gliding in 1959. He became a glider, and he began to start painting landscapes from the gliders or the gliding pilot's perspective. And the result, some amazing pictures, which I saw at this exhibition. Sorry, I can't show you one, but I can describe it. One of the most famous is a painting called Thermal, and the whole painting is basically different shades of blue, but there you can see it's tremendously turbulent. You can see the way on one side of the painting the air is spiraling up, and then it forms into a big dark mass, which is a cloud, and how it spills over the other side. And Lanyon is actually describing his sensation of flying in a glider, where in order to fly that glider, you have to recognize that actually the sky is a tremendously turbulent, heterogeneous medium. And if you're going to glide in it, you have to understand and recognize these folds and how to use them in just the same way as a bird does all the time. So for the bird or for the glider pilot, the sky is not at all homogeneous. It's very, very complex. And you have to deal with that heterogeneous complexity of it. I was reflecting on this just a week or two ago when I was on a plane from just a standard British Airways flight from London to Chicago, and I was sitting in this plane and I was thinking, I am not flying. despite what the airline magazine insisted, that I'm on this flight and I'm flying British Airways, I thought, I am definitely not flying, because this plane that I'm in is something like a guided missile, and I'm in it, and it's treating the air as a purely homogeneous medium through which it has to drill a hole. It's just going straight through. And if there's turbulence, that's sort of something you just have to break through and break down. It's not something that the plane actually uses in order to lift itself up. So that in air travel, we've come back to this idea of the sky as this great homogeneous mass rather than a complex heterogeneous system of flows. But still there's the problem of how is it that we actually see the sky, or what actually it is. I've done this with students, that you go out into a bit of landscape, and we've done this on Aberdeen Beach, so we're by the sea, and we're looking out from the beach, and first we look down at our feet on the shingle, and there's the sand, and there's the waves breaking. You look a bit further, and you see ships, and then you see the horizon, and then you lift your eyes even further, and well, there's obviously you see the sky. But what is the difference between looking at the sand or the sea and looking at the sky? Because when we look at the sea or the sand, it's perfectly clear there's a surface or a complex of surfaces there. Light is being reflected off those surfaces, and we know we see waves or sand or whatever it is because of the way the incident light is being reflected off. And we say, yes, there's a surface. As soon as you cross over the horizon, there isn't a surface anymore. And yet we see the sky. So what is going on when we say we see the sky, but there's no actual surface to be seen? And this was, I mentioned Gibson a while ago, and this was a problem that troubled him a great deal. And it came down to a problem of how we understand light. And Gibson then said something very puzzling indeed about the sky. He says, when I look at the sky, to me it seems that I see the sky and not luminosity as such. Now, this was because Gibson was convinced that the one thing we never ever see is light itself. What we see are all the objects off which light is reflected. So light is like a vector that delivers to our eyes information about the environment, but disappears at the point of entry. What we actually see are the objects themselves that the light delivers to us. So when we see stars, we don't see starlight, we see stars, which are objects in the sky, and the light simply delivers it to us. So Gibson was saying, like, we can't, when I see the sky, but not luminosity as such, but then you think, well, what on earth, if we're saying there's this shimmering blue, or whatever it is, what on earth is the sky once we've subtracted its luminosity? What is left of the sky if you take its luminosity away? Another philosopher of the mid-20th century who thought about this a lot was Maurice Merleau-Ponty, one of the main figures in phenomenological philosophy. And he agreed with Gibson on quite a lot, but not when it came to light and the sky. Because for Merleau-Ponty, the sky is not simply an object of the physical universe that we can see, nor, he said, is it a concept in the mind of the observer. For Merleau-Ponty, the sky and its luminosity are one and the same. He says, perhaps a bit romantically, imagine yourself lying out on a lovely summer's day, up there is the sky. Says Merleau-Ponty, I am the sky itself. I am the sky itself, as it is drawn together and unified. My consciousness is saturated with this limitless blue. Perhaps he should have been writing for a tourist agency, but anyway, it's a nice thought. But so for him, luminosity is something that gets right inside him. It's what his consciousness is filled with all this luminosity. And what this comes down to, when we start thinking about what we mean by the sky, is that it takes us directly to the problem which nobody has yet been able to answer: what actually do we mean by light? Are we going to say, and this is Gibson's view, was that light is what the physicists say it is. It's emanations of radiant energy. which you could think of, if you like, as waves, or if you like, as particles. But that's the physicist's view of what light is. So light comes to us from outside, it reaches our eyes, the pupils of our eyes, the retina maybe, but it doesn't get any further than that. The light simply delivers information to the body. Merleau-Ponty would say that sure, without all this physical radiation and energy, there could be no experience of light, but we cannot reduce light to energetic radiations. Light is an experience. It's an experience of luminosity, of the saturation of the mind with colour and brilliance, and that's what light is all about. In his terms, it is what we could call an affectation of being, and it's an affectation, this is very important, an affectation which blends together or brings together the cosmic, which is all out there, and the affective, which is your own sense of consciousness and being. And that bringing together of affect and the cosmic is what we could understand by atmosphere. So that light is, in a sense, neither cosmic nor affective. It's not a property of the physical universe on its own. It's not a property of psychic states. It is an atmospheric property, which is where those two things, where the distinction between the cosmic and the affective actually can no longer obtain. I don't know, many of you are probably familiar with that very famous picture painted by Vincent van Gogh in 1889, called Starry Night. It's a nighttime scene. You can see at the bottom of the picture some houses and fields and so on, and then he's got all these stars up there. It's an amazing picture, and one of the most amazing things about it is that it's the night sky is full of swirls of paint that go like this, and the stars vary from a brilliant white to a kind of slightly off yellow. And an earlier version of when he actually a year or two previously tried painting stars, and he painted the stars the way children usually do, where the star would be a pinprick of light, and then there'd be rays coming off it in all directions like that, as though the ray of light was something that came from the star to the perceiver. But in Starry Night, the light doesn't go from the point source of light to the eye. It goes around like this and then like that. And Van Gogh was quite clear, actually in correspondence to a friend, that he didn't want to paint the equivalent of what you might see in a planetarium. He didn't want to paint a representation. He wanted to paint what it felt like to spend time gazing at the night sky. And as your attention moves from star to star, it describes these swirls of light, that the light is not something that simply travels in straight lines from a source to a recipient, but swirls around in between. And in looking at the night sky then, Van Gogh was recognizing that he wasn't just looking at the stars in the sky, but the stars were actually in his eyes. That he was, if you like, a starstruck painter. That he was looking at the stars with eyes that had already brought starlight into their way of seeing. Completely by chance, thanks to the bookshop Barnes & Noble in the US, I chanced upon this, which I should have known, this quotation from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the famous balcony scene where Romeo is eulogizing, and she's up there by the window, and she's awfully beautiful and the rest of it. And then this is what Romeo says. "Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. What if her eyes were there, they in her head?" Beautiful. What he's saying there is that Romeo, looking at Juliet, is thinking, actually, just for a moment, the stars in her eye are in her eyes, and her eyes are out there with the stars. They've changed places just suddenly. And that's exactly what Van Gogh was getting at, and exactly what Merleau-Ponty was trying to explain when he was trying to explain what it is actually to experience light. He said it's a way in which we can be outside ourselves and yet come back to ourselves at the same time. We can be at one point, at one and the same time, roaming the cosmos and yet be at home in our bodies. So that light is generated as a kind of fission fusion reaction, a way in which we come together in our bodies at the moment in which we're completely exploded apart from them. So light, in that view, does not travel in straight lines from a source to a recipient. It's not going from here to there. It's swirling around in rather the same way that Peter Lanyon, in his description of the thermal, described the air swirling around in the sky. So light twists and turns. It behaves like the wind. The wind, which as you walk out in the wind, is not coming from there and arriving here. It's not saying, okay, I've arrived now, tap on the cheek, but is brushing past you on its way to nowhere. I came across a beautiful illustration of this in a detail from a manuscript dating from around about 1477. It's called The Hours of Mary of Burgundy. And in a little detail, it shows Mary, the lady to whom this manuscript was dedicated, and it describes a ray of light. And it shows this ray of light, and Mary it shows it coming from somewhere out there, nowhere in particular, curling around, going through her eyeball and out back the other side, and curling around and going nowhere in particular. And Mary is holding the thread out there in the gesture that ladies at that time always used for spinning thread from a distaff. So the ray of light is actually being compared to, in that picture, to a thread. And it is like the wind coming through the body and moving out the other side. It's not going from A to B, it's not going from source to recipient, but swirling around in between. It's as though you take it in and breathe it out again. So that, I don't know how long I've been talking for, but that's more or less what I wanted to say that if we start thinking about what on earth is the sky, we recognize that the sky is a phenomenon of phenomenal experience. It's not an objective datum in the physical world. That if we recognize that the sky is its luminosity, then we end up with very profound questions, because it forces us to reconsider actually what we are talking about when we experience light, whether it be the light of the sun or the light of the stars. Thank you.
Cafe Culture North East is supported by Newcastle University, Peels and Dance City. We're also supported by DC Cafe, who host the events.